database for their magnetic key cards that opened the doors to their office, because each commissioner was issued a magnetic key card, and they used their Georgia Public Records Act to request the database for all of the magnetic key card door hits, and they were able to show that these commissioners almost never used their keys to open the door. And so, you know, now some of them said, well, you know, we're very polite here, we hold doors open for each other all the time, but you know, it was, and they admitted, you know, sometimes, right, you have to own up to the fact that your research is potentially incomplete, and they did that. They hedged the hell out of it in the story, but they said, you know, look, this is at least indicative of some sort of a trend, right? When Commissioner Baker's key card is used every single day, and Commissioner McDonald's key card is used only once every 2 weeks, right? I mean, are people just a lot more polite to Commissioner McDonald that they'll hold the door for him, they see Baker come and they slam it, right? I mean, no, it's probably not, right? And so it's probably telling you that McDonald doesn't come to the office as much as Baker does. And it's a really good story. And you know, again, just because they thought outside of the norm as to, you know, what is a public record. They used the most kind of imaginative possible definition of what's an open record. This one just came out last week in the New York Times, and you know, if you're sort of just getting your feet wet as a public records reporter, you're just looking for something really, just a really simple, quick, easy hit. And by the way, this works for broadcast excellently as well. You know, the inspection reports from college cafeterias and high school cafeterias too. Every dining establishment has to be inspected just like a steakhouse does. Every dining establishment, high school and college, has to be inspected by the county health department in almost every jurisdiction, and they're happy to show you those. They're happy to show you those. You know, we got the Taco Bell, and there's a thing hanging up on the wall that says we got an 86, and you know that's a B or something. They have to do that for cafeterias too. And by the way, the USDA, which is the federal agency that administers the free lunch program at schools, the USDA has made this a matter of federal law that school cafeterias at the K-12 level have to be inspected twice a year, and you may be surprised to find out that in your jurisdiction, we're not doing it. There's a lot of slippage there in the twice a year inspection regime, so you may find out that they're not keeping up with their federal obligation there. But you know, you're always going to find you're always going to find something lurid if you look long enough in those inspection reports. Where is the yeah?
Are some of the stories that you just pulled up, do you have them listed on the website?
You know, I will. I will. Most every one of these is linked to a Transparency Tuesday blog item, and that's why I'm using those. So yeah, most every one. This is, there you go. There we go. Who doesn't want to write that story? Who doesn't want to read that story? Jello and mouse poop in a school cafeteria, and that's indeed what it's about. Is that there was mouse poop in the Jello? Come on, talk about sweeps week. I mean, that's a and it's all by the use of public records. So you know, if people think the public record stories are all dry and boring and they're all about budgets and stuff, sometimes they're about mouse shit in the Jello. So, Let's show one more here, and then I want to, here you go. This one is just, this is a thing of beauty here, and those of you who are in the LA area have probably seen this one. Billions to Spend is a series that just came out starting in February and then continuing in March in LA Times. I know some of you have read these, but this is a package that the LA Times had a two-person investigative team spend about 8 months doing this package about wasteful spending by the Los Angeles Community College District, which is a multi-campus district. It's the second biggest in the country. Only Miami-Dade is bigger. And they had like $1.3 billion to spend on construction in a very short amount of time. You know, the buildings were getting old, and so they floated all these bonds in order to catch up on their backlog construction needs. But come to find out, you know, this very small group of elected local officials who run this community college district were a little bit overwhelmed by spending $1.3 billion in a short amount of time, and they were just completely sort of unable to keep watch on how the contractors were spending their money. And so using public records requests, these reporters were able to find out, for example, that a science lab that was built as part of this bond issue had these wild fluctuations in temperature that nobody could explain, and it will wind up killing the animals in the science lab. It's like you come in and, oh my God, my lizards froze to death overnight because the thermostats didn't work in the science lab. And there were just a bunch of different anecdotes like that that they were able to tease out. And there were two major sources of records that they used. Number one was emails. They used email correspondence requested between the key individuals involved in the oversight of the construction budget at the LA Community College District. The other was when a government agency embarks on a big construction binge like that, they often have inspectors, either inspectors that are on their staff or inspectors, in this case, that they contracted with, right? And so they had an outside contracting company that came in and looked behind the builders, basically, looked behind the builders to see if they were doing what they were promised to do. And oftentimes these reports from these inspectors were very critical of the way that the builders are doing their job, and the regulators were not acting on them. You know, they were getting these dire warnings from the inspectors saying, you know, you got to stop this right now. This building is running way over budget. It's running way below, way off schedule. You got to do something about this. And the reports were able to show that the members of the community college district didn't sort of respond to these red flags. So my favorite story was a vice president at one of the campuses let's see if we can find this. There we go. Family Firm gets a chair. A vice president at one of the campuses was sort of moonlighting. She and her husband had a building inspection business on the side, and she was drawing two paychecks. She was drawing a paycheck from the college, and she was drawing a paycheck from the building inspection business with which the college contracted. And so, needless to say, right, in her college administrator role, she was not terribly motivated to try to get the lowest price from this inspection firm. And after this conflict of interest was exposed, the administrator, in fact, resigned from the college. So, you know, very impactful piece of journalism there, all done by a very aggressive use of public records. That sort of brings up one kind of overall point that I want to make before I throw it out to questions here, and that is emails. There is a huge legal battle going on, and it is spilling over into legislatures as well as to how much of people's email you can and can't get by way of a public records request. And there have been a number of court cases sort of filtering their way up. The most recent one was in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But the consensus of the court seems to be that if emails are personal in nature, right, if it is, honey, pick up a dozen eggs on your way home, right? Even if I send it on my government computer on government time while I'm supposed to be working, that's not subject to being produced under a public records request because it was never a business record of the agency to begin with, right? I mean, a note between me and my wife is just not a business record of the agency. So they can legitimately exempt those. Now, I will tell you, that exemption makes me very nervous because sometimes the personal emails are the ones you most want to see. We had a case a couple of years ago in West Virginia where a guy who was a justice of the Supreme Court in West Virginia was buddies with a coal company executive who had a case in front of the West Virginia Supreme Court. And they were emailing each other during the time this case was going on, like, hey pal, want to play a quick 9 holes this afternoon kind of thing, right? And of course you want to see those because it shows that the judge probably should have taken himself out of consideration of his buddy's case, right? But he was able successfully to keep those emails concealed on the grounds that they were personal and therefore not a business record of the West Virginia Supreme Court. So, yeah, I think that's a bad blanket exception. I certainly understand in 90% of the cases who needs the honey pick up a dozen eggs email, but in the other 10% of the cases, that's really newsworthy stuff. And so my tip on that would be keep an eye on your state legislatures because lots of them are trying to sneak that exemption through in exemptions to the Public Records Act. So write about that and keep watch on it to make sure it doesn't sneak in there. Go ahead, you had something you read. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
But,
Yeah.
who decides whether it's personal in nature?
Right. That's the person who's responding to the request, which may be the individuals whose email it is. I mean, that is often what we find is if I request, Vice President Simon's emails, what the school will say is, well, Vice President Simon is the only one who reads his emails, and so he's going to have to go through them, and yeah, right, he makes that judgment call. And I mean, that's, there is a lot of trust built into the open record system in this country. There's a lot of trust, I mean, at the end of the day, an ill-motivated person, a person who just really wants to, destroy emails or conceal emails is going to be able to do it almost all the time. The only check on it is, first of all, hopefully they've sent it to someone who is honest, right? And so if you can get both ends of the conversation, and this has happened, right? That people, you get an inconsistent production of emails. This is when I was a litigator. This was like cha-ching, right? As, I served two identical requests on two ends of the conversation, and this guy gives me a bunch of emails, and this guy says, we never had any emails, right? Now I've caught you lying, and so now I got two stories. I got the emails and I got the lie. So, if you get both ends of the conversation, that's great. Or hopefully there's some whistleblower, right, who can tell you, hey, these guys email each other all the time. I mean, I know they did, and so, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if people are just, have their mind made up that they're going to conceal stuff, they're probably going to get away with it. Go ahead, you were going to.
Psychological skills for getting officials to give you what you need.
Yeah.
Got any?
Right. The Jedi mind tricks, yes. We were talking about that. Yeah. Here is, one trick that I have seen people use with some success, and I heartily recommend it, is think about writing about the absence of the records. Think about writing about the absence of the records. Somebody asked me, I was actually at an SPJ thing, I was at this very thing last year, and somebody asked me this question about police brutality complaints. They were doing a story about, if this is you, speak up. They were doing a story about, I'm going to say it was the city of San Francisco. It was a good-sized police department, one where you knew they had at least one police brutality complaint somewhere, right? And they were doing a story about this police department, and the police department was telling them, yeah, we don't keep records that way. Yeah, we just don't keep them that way. We're not going to be able to comply with that request for complaints about police brutality because that's just not how we keep records. And what I said was, then that's your story. Your story is, the San Francisco Police Department doesn't know how many times they have had complaints of police brutality. They can't tell you whether they're going up, down, or sideways. No one bothers to count. That's your story. And I think half of the time, when it's clear you're about to write that story, all of a sudden the skies will part and they will say, oh, of course we keep those records. What do you mean? Of course we know exactly how many police brutality complaints we have. Like, what idiot would not keep count of something that important, right? And so I think that is my number one trick, is if you're getting stonewalled about the absence of records, write about whether it is a responsible thing for an agency not to know that information itself, right? If you don't keep track of that, isn't that in some way a dereliction of your public duty? That you don't know, like, how many cell phones are issued to people in this agency? How many cars are issued to these people in your agency? You don't know how many cars you have? Like, so did anybody count to make sure they're still the same number as when you started? Right? I mean, that's a pretty embarrassing story. And so write about sometimes the absence of counting is itself the story, and it can jar loose the information. That's my number one tip. The other one is, there's almost always some backdoor way of getting at stuff if you think about who else knows. Just always ask yourself, who else might know this information? Because if you find some independent third party without an axe to grind, without a dog in the fight, as we say in Georgia, then that person may be much, much more motivated to talk to you. For example, any kind of a major, like a construction project or activity that goes on at a government agency is going to need a lot of different permits and is going to be subject to a lot of different inspections, right? Those are going to be done by agencies that are separate and apart from the one that you're writing about. And so, like, the university might shut you down. They might say, yeah, no, we just, we're not going to talk to you about this. But maybe they had to get an environmental permit from the EPA. Maybe they had to get an environmental permit from your state version of your EPA. So now you got another agency outside of the university who doesn't care whether they look bad or not. I mean, they're probably happy to talk to you. So think about who else knows is there another entity who doesn't have an axe to grind, from whom you can get comparable information? Go ahead.
Yes, I had a question, because you talked a lot about FERPA,
Yeah.
but we both actually took Dave Collier's computer system
Yeah.
learning class, and we tried to access a database from our campus health.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about HIPAA,
Oh,
because,
God,
you know,
yes. Yeah.
researching this and trying to get this database, I mean, we asked for a de-identified,
Uh-huh.
but in HIPAA, when you read it, it's really, there's nothing that says anything about de-identified health information. It says, like, it's such a gray area that we had such a
Mhm.
hard time, we had to end up giving up and pursuing a backup plan for this project.
Yeah.
Because it was just like an endless fight.
Describe the data that you were.
We were trying to get, because Campus Health has like, I know that they keep the database, they have it in their forms, of just student records, anyone who has, or patients, anyone who has come to the Campus Health
Yeah.
Services for anything since
Yeah.
2005, they've entered it into the computer, they have the database.
Yeah.
And all we wanted was that, just deleting the column of names, student ID numbers, and
Oh, for
addresses.
Christ's sake, yeah.
And so they came back with the excuse that any of the stuff that pertained to that student, whether it was their GPA, how long they'd been at the school, anything, was protected under FERPA, and then
Yeah.
also because it was medical records, whether we didn't have their names or not, it was protected under HIPAA.
So like
So we just got
literally,
stonewalled.
what you're after is how many people are visiting the health clinic.
We just wanted to
Yeah.
see what they were going for, because we were trying
Okay.
to do stories on, like,
Yeah.
for instance, I was trying to do stories on how many people were going to get prescribed Adderall, you know,
Mhm.
to see, you know, if there was a problem at our campus with that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And I didn't want to know any of the students' information, I just
Yeah.
wanted to see how many students gone there and were asking about, you know, attention problems.
Yeah. It's funny because HIPAA is one of those things that gets invoked, like FERPA, about half of the time falsely. HIPAA is pretty narrow. It really only applies to people who provide either medical services or health insurance, and that's it. Those are the only people to whom it applies. And so, like if you're a sports team, right? If a guy blows out his ACL on the sports team, a coach can tell you that he blew out his ACL. He's not a doctor and he's not a health insurer, and so that HIPAA doesn't apply to him. That happens to be one of the few times, because they are a healthcare provider, that HIPAA probably does legitimately apply. Now you're right, the statute itself doesn't say in so many words you can have the information without names attached to it, but that's the purpose of HIPAA. The purpose is to protect your individual identifiable medical records, not aggregate numbers. And I think you could make, if you could find some sane person to talk to, probably I would go to the University Attorney's Office and try to make this argument. Look, we read health statistics all the time. I mean,